Welcome to Beyond the Script, the podcast that talks about the spiritual side of entrepreneurship, intuition, identity, and of course, some everyday life moments. Some days it's business and other days it's life, because when you're creating with the divine, it's all connected. I'm your host, Nikki Lynn, intuitive writing and business mentor, mom, creator, and a deep believer that when intuition meets strategy, we get to create a life and business that feel like the highest version of us. So grab your notebook, take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and let's go beyond the script. In this episode, we're going to dive into the discomfort of becoming and why identity work isn't always cute. And sometimes it can actually be quite uncomfortable and daunting to allow a new identity to emerge or to reawaken an identity that is ready to be awakened during a certain chapter of our life. When this happens, it can feel like everything is crumbling and coming together at once. I know I have experienced that multiple times where it's like everything feels like it's falling apart, and at the same time, it feels like it's coming together in the most like destructively beautiful type of way, right? And so this right here, like the discomfort part, this is the reason that most people stay stuck, is because they're not willing to go through the discomfort of allowing the new identity and ultimately the unknown to take over. One thing about humans is we hate the unknown. We like to be in control. We like predictability, right? The unknown is such a shock to our nervous system. This is why, think back to when you were a child, if you ever experienced this. This is why, some of us would listen to the footsteps coming down the hall and try to get a gauge for who it was and what the pace was and things like that, so that we could try to prepare ourselves for what was to come next, right? We like that. We like to know what's happening. We like to be in control. And so we did that for survival, right? If you experienced that. But overall, we like to be in control because it's good for survival, right? Knowing what's happening next is a survival skill at the end of the day. But when it comes to growth, it's actually one of our biggest downfalls. For us to grow and for our soul to evolve, we have to sometimes watch things crumble around us while also watching things crumble within us. We have to dive into the unknown. And when we do this, our flight or fight response is always ignited. We are not sure what to do. And so, because of that, we run back to what's familiar, which are the identities that we have already been embodying, or the identities that we have already established and that we are already familiar with, even if they're not serving us. We also will step into versions of an identity that people have told us to behave as, not our true identity. And this happens sometimes when we embark on a new identity and we're not sure what we're supposed to do. So we look to others to see how they've done it, and then we try to mimic that form of the identity. I'll give you two examples with that. So the first example I'm going to give you is motherhood, right? Take motherhood, for example. I know, like, for me, whenever I have guilt, and I used to have guilt when I would do things for myself, and I realized through my own identity work that what this stemmed from was from hearing like, oh, like moms can't do that, or the little jokes about like, oh, well, your life is over now. It's all about the baby, and different things like that. And like, yes, it's absolutely all about the children, but if you're a mom, you still had identities before you were a mom, right? You still were somebody else before you became a mom. You weren't born a mother. And yet, so when you transition into motherhood and you go through that, if you either take the example that you were given by your own mother or motherly figure, and you mimic what you liked and you try to remove what you didn't like out of that. And then as you continue into the journey, because you can't backtrack out of that identity now, as you continue into the journey, well, then you start to pick apart what pieces of the identity that you actually want to hold to make it, a solid identity for yourself, and which ones you're taking from others. I remember when it comes to like the mothering identity, before I get into my next example, I remember I had a conversation with a mentor and she really broke down identity stuff to me. Like, I'm talking like took me on a roller coaster ride through my own identities. And she made a great point when it came to the motherhood identity. And she told me that the reason the transition to motherhood is so hard is because we embark on a new identity and we can't turn away from it. So, going back to what I said earlier about once things get uncomfortable with other identities, we can then retreat and go back to what's familiar in motherhood and fatherhood also, but I'm mainly talking to the women here. In motherhood, once you embark on that identity, like that's it. You're really forced into it, right? If you keep the child and you raise the child, you are forced into motherhood, whether you feel like it or not, whether you're exhausted, whether you're depleted, whatever the circumstances are, you still have that identity and you still have to keep on to that identity, right? And so that's why that is one of the identities that once you get it, you're really just you're stuck with it. You're forced into it. It's not like other identities that we can retreat from, right? Like let's take the entrepreneur identity as, and that was my next example anyways. But taking the entrepreneur identity, if you've never been an entrepreneur, if you come from a corporate background and you weren't, maybe you weren't surrounded with other entrepreneurs or anything like that, well, it's the same thing. If you're not familiar with it, you're going to initially start to look for and copy the other entrepreneurs around you, the ones that have like the success that you desire, right? And the reason that people will back out of business or that people will start and then stop and then start and then stop will be because that identity is uncomfortable. And if nobody is forcing you into it, the way you're like have to stick with the motherhood identity, if you don't have to stick with the entrepreneur identity, then you'll retreat back to whatever was familiar, right? If you are also not in tuned with your intuition, and I discussed this a little bit on the last episode about the spiritual side of entrepreneurship, but if you are not intuitively guided in entrepreneurship, well, then when you embark on that identity, and you are mimicking those around you, you're mimicking the other entrepreneurs, then once it starts to get uncomfortable, once it starts to kind of get into the discomfort with your nervous system, the discomfort with the ego, and all of that, well, it's easier to turn away. This is why for entrepreneurs, I always say, like, you should be in a community, because if you're in a community with some accountability, then it's a little bit harder to turn back, right? This is why, like, yes, coaching is amazing because coaching does give you the tools and the structure that you need, but it's also the accountability piece. And I think a lot of people forget that, like that there is an accountability piece to coaching also that keeps you, being able to stay rooted in this new identity. Because anytime that, you want to accomplish something, but you are not, if you're not holding yourself accountable and you're not checking into anything, then it's so easy to revert back to whatever was comfortable, right? Another example would be like, let's say you had a desire your whole life to be a gym goer, but then the old identity creeps in and is telling you like, oh, you can skip the gym today, or you want it to be the person who like wakes up early and goes to the gym and starts their day like that. But then it gets uncomfortable if it's not really like, if it's not the identity you've been holding on to, well, then the old identity creeps back in and tells you like, oh, just sleep in, oh, just skip it, and different things like that. And that's because, again, if identity work was easy, then everyone will be doing it. Everybody would be stepping into the identities that they're meant to step into. And quite frankly, the world would be a better place, but that's a whole other topic. But if it was easy, everybody would step into their true identity. And what's also interesting about identity and identity work is, even though it's uncomfortable, we always think that we're like embarking into this new journey, and we are into this new identity and all of this. But the only thing that's really new is the journey. The identity has always lived within you. The identity has always been in there. Because if it wasn't within you, you would not have a desire to be that person. You would not have a desire to hold that identity. You wouldn't think twice about it, right? You wouldn't like it wouldn't be something that you would be striving for or wanting to strive for if it didn't exist already somewhere within you. And so next time when you're thinking about like, well, who am I becoming and what's the identity I want to, really take on, or what identity do I want to shift within myself, think about it that way. Think about it as a remembering and as simply like a coming back to yourself. When you start to feel the discomfort of the new identity and you want to revert back to what was easy and things like that, I also want you to remember that the ego's job in our bodies and our brains is to show us proof, right? It's to show us proof of whatever our belief systems are. And so when you are unraveling to, establish a new identity, to, I'll just say, level up, as as a simple term, when you're working on leveling up and you have to embark on this new identity and your nervous system and your ego is pushing back, I want you to remind yourself of the new identity, the pieces that you already have. And so, like, take the gym example, right? And I've said this in some of my content before, but take the gym as an example. You desire the identity to be a person who wakes up early and goes to the gym and starts their day with a workout. Well, the rest of you is like, no, this is so foreign. This is so new. I don't want to do this. Like, this is so uncomfortable, right? Like, why are we doing this, right? Well, so what pieces of that can you bring into right now? What pieces of that identity can you do now? Maybe it's that you're not getting up early to go to the gym, but you're simply like prioritizing body movement, right? And then you show your ego proof, like, hey, we can stay committed to this body movement. And then you tack on another layer to the identity, right? Like, okay, well, we've been doing body movement every single day. Let's get to the gym every day, right? Instead of just this body movement wherever, let's set up a gym schedule. And then you do the gym schedule. And then you do, and then after that's, been established a little bit, then maybe you go into the get up early or something, or you do it in the reverse. You say, okay, well, let's just start with waking up early. We don't have to wake up early to get to the gym, but let's just prove to ourselves that we can wake up earlier every day. And then you start waking up earlier. Then you add some body movement into it. Then you add the gym into it. And before you know it, you are now in the identity that you desired. One thing about humans is we sometimes will try to overdo it all at once, and then we shock ourselves, and then we retreat back instead of just taking it in baby steps, because baby steps is still stepping forward. Instead of taking it in baby steps, we want to completely 180 our life in 2 hours. And I'm not saying it's not possible, but at the same time, if you are in this start and stop momentum, well, then you might need to take a step back and look at it in baby steps. And this, even though I'm talking about life right now, this is absolutely applicable to business. When you are growing your business, when you are launching new offers, when you are establishing, your business and regulating your nervous system to be able to handle larger amounts of money and things like that. Well, again, we all want like this quantum leap, 0 to 100,000, in the next 30 days or whatever, when really it's all in the baby steps and the consistency. When you see yourself with the identity of a woman who holds large amounts of cash, large amounts of money, has a profitable business, what is it that she does that's different than what you do today? And of that identity that's different, what is it that you can bring into right now? Does she wake up a little bit earlier? Does she go out on the weekends? Does she drink? Does she, let's see, does she have social media boundaries where she's not online past a certain time, right? Like, what are the things that she's doing? That would actually be a great journaling prompt. And if you're listening, then we write here. That would be a great journaling prompt. What are the habits of seven-figure me? What are the habits I have as a woman who makes $50,000 a month? You see what I mean? So you could ask that question on the top of your page and then write it out. Set a timer for 10 minutes, write in a free flow state without thinking about it. Just, see what comes out for 10 minutes, write out all your habits that you have, and then look at it. Look at it and see what is different about that version of you holding that identity and this version of you holding this identity. And as you start to see what the difference is, then what can you bring from that identity into this identity? What can you do today that brings you closer to that? The thing about identities that we desire too, it's sometimes more so about expanding our capacity to hold that identity. And that is also where a lot of the discomfort comes from. But once you understand how to utilize your inner tools, if you will, and when you understand how your ego will react and why you're having this pushback on embarking this new identity, and that you're not broken for having the pushback, you just never had the tools to be able to move through it. Once you understand that, then yes, it's still uncomfortable to become, because it's still, like I said at the beginning of the episode, can feel like everything is crumbling and coming together at the same time. But you also have a little bit more strength, a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more understanding on how to move through it. And you also have a little bit more grace with yourself if you do end up falling back, or if you do end up doing something that feels more aligned with the old identity and less aligned with the new identity. You're able to catch it a lot quicker, and then you're able to move through it faster. And that's really all it is being able to stay consistent with the habits, with the embodiment, with the belief of the new identity, and being able to have the capacity and to hold the capacity that the identity already belongs to you. So, with all of that being said, I am going to link into the show notes a free 5-day email course I have. This one is called the Identity Rewrite, and it helps you to understand what identity you're holding on to right now and see what identity is trying to emerge, and then learn how to start embodying that identity. So I will have that linked for you in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode and this conversation, be sure to share it with somebody else who you feel would enjoy that. And as always, thank you for listening and going beyond the script with me. New episode will drop next Tuesday. Until then, be sure to follow me on Instagram @_the Nikki Lynn, and I will talk to you all next week.